Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her small Texas town. While other children played with dolls or video games, she was climbing trees, building forts, and challenging the boys to arm wrestling matches. She usually won. Her father, a former Marine, had raised her to be tough after her mother died when Sarah was only 8 years old. He taught her to shoot, to fight, and, most importantly, to never back down from a challenge. By the time Sarah turned 18, she had already decided her future. The military wasn't just a career choice for her, it was a calling. She wanted to serve her country, and she wanted to prove that a woman could do anything a man could do, maybe even better. Her high school guidance counselor tried to steer her toward college, suggesting she study nursing or education, but Sarah had bigger plans. The Navy recruiter was surprised when this petite blonde girl walked into his office and announced she wanted to become a Navy SEAL. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 120 pounds, Sarah didn't look like the typical SEAL candidate. But there was something in her green eyes, a fire and determination that made the recruiter take her seriously. "Miss Martinez," the recruiter said carefully, "the SEAL program is extremely demanding. Very few people make it through, even strong men who have been training their whole lives." Sarah leaned forward in her chair. "I'm not most people, sir. I've been preparing for this my whole life, even if I didn't know it. My father always told me that size doesn't matter if you have the right mindset and the willingness to outwork everyone else." The recruiter explained the process. First, she would need to complete basic Navy training, then advance to more specialized programs before even being considered for SEAL training. The path would take years, and there was no guarantee she would be accepted into the SEAL program at all. "I understand, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. "When do I start?" 6 months later, Sarah found herself at the Naval Station Great Lakes for basic training. The other recruits looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some made jokes about the little girl playing soldier, but Sarah ignored them. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. From day one, Sarah threw herself into training with an intensity that surprised even the drill instructors. While other recruits complained about the early morning wake-up calls, she was already awake, doing extra push-ups in the barracks. When others struggled with the physical fitness requirements, she was helping them improve while continuing to push her own limits. Her bunkmate, Jessica Chun, became her closest friend during basic training. Jessica was planning to become a Navy nurse and couldn't understand Sarah's obsession with becoming a SEAL. "Why put yourself through all that torture?" Jessica asked one evening as they cleaned their gear. "You're smart enough to do anything. You could be an officer, work in intelligence, or medical. Why choose the hardest possible path?" Sarah paused in her cleaning and looked out the window at the training grounds. "Because someone has to be first," she said quietly. "Women have been fighting for the right to serve in combat roles for decades. The SEAL teams were just open to women a few years ago, but hardly anyone has even tried. I want to show that it's possible." Jessica shook her head with admiration. "You're either the bravest person I know or the craziest." "Maybe both," Sarah laughed. Basic training flew by in a blur of physical challenges, classroom instruction, and military discipline. Sarah excelled in almost every area. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in her class. Her physical fitness test results consistently topped the charts, and her academic performance was outstanding. But what really set her apart was her leadership ability and her willingness to help struggling classmates. When Private Johnson was having trouble with the swimming requirements, Sarah spent her free time in the pool with him, teaching him techniques her father had shown her. When Private Williams couldn't keep up on the long runs, Sarah ran beside him, encouraging him and helping him find his pace. The drill instructors noticed, and they liked what they saw. Martinez, drill instructor Petty Officer First Class Thompson, called her aside one day. "You've got something special. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I don't say that about many recruits. Have you given any more thought to your career path?" "Yes, sir. I still want to try for the SEAL program." Thompson studied her for a long moment. "It's not going to be easy. Hell, it's not going to be possible for most people. The attrition rate is around 80% for men who have been training for this their whole lives. For a woman." He paused. "Let's just say the odds aren't in your favor." "I understand, sir. But I have to try." "All right then. I'll make some calls." There are some people you should meet, some programs that might help prepare you. But, Martinez. Yes, sir. Don't let anyone tell you it's impossible. I've seen impossible things happen when someone wants them bad enough. After basic training, Sarah was assigned to a ship for her initial Navy service, but her real focus was on preparing for SEAL training. She spent every free moment working out, studying tactics and strategy, and learning everything she could about special operations. She took additional courses in languages, combat medicine, and advanced weapons training. Her shipmates had mixed reactions to her goals. Some were supportive, understanding that her success would open doors for other women in the military. Others were openly skeptical or even hostile, believing that women had no place in elite special forces units. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, was one of her harshest critics. A 20-year Navy veteran with multiple deployments, he made no secret of his belief that women would weaken the SEAL teams. "Listen, Martinez," he said one day after Sarah had finished an intense workout session on deck. "I've got nothing against women in the Navy. My wife served for 12 years. But the SEAL teams are different. It's not about being politically correct or fair. It's about life and death. When bullets start flying and your buddy is bleeding out, you need to know that everyone on your team can carry you to safety if necessary. No offense, but you weigh about as much as my gear bag." Sarah looked him directly in the eye. "With respect, Chief, you're assuming that being a good SEAL is just about physical strength. But, from what I've studied, the most important qualities are mental toughness, intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to work as part of a team. I think I can bring all of those things to the table." The chief laughed, but not unkindly. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't stop bullets or carry a wounded teammate 3 miles through enemy territory." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But the right training, tactics, and teamwork can make up for a lot. And who knows? Maybe having someone on the team who thinks differently, who approaches problems from a different angle, might actually be an advantage." As her initial Navy service continued, Sarah never lost sight of her goal. She received recommendations from her commanding officers, continued to excel in every assignment, and, finally, received word that she had been accepted for the preliminary SEAL training programs. The news came on a Tuesday morning while she was reviewing navigation charts. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Harris, called her to his office. "Martinez, I have some news for you. Your application for SEAL training has been approved. You'll be shipping out to Coronado in 6 weeks for the preparatory programs." Sarah felt her heart race, but she kept her expression professional. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Harris said. "But I want you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just about proving yourself anymore. There are going to be people watching your every move, waiting for you to fail. Some of them will be rooting for you, but others will be hoping to prove that women don't belong in the SEAL teams. The pressure is going to be intense." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because if you fail, and statistically, you probably will, just like most of the men who try, some people will use that as evidence that no woman should ever be given this opportunity again. That's not fair, but it's reality." Sarah nodded. "I've thought about that, sir. But I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made it. And if I do fail, at least maybe I'll have shown other women that it's worth trying." Harris smiled. "That's exactly the attitude that's going to get you through this. Good luck, Martinez. The whole ship will be pulling for you." Word of Sarah's acceptance spread quickly through the ship. Some of her shipmates congratulated her enthusiastically, while others seemed less pleased. She overheard conversations where people discussed whether she would make it past the first week of training. The night before she was scheduled to leave for California, Jessica Chun, who was now serving on a different ship, called her. "I can't believe you're actually doing this," Jessica said. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but also excited. This is what I've been working toward for years. What if it's as hard as everyone says?" Sarah looked out at the ocean from the ship's deck. "Then, I'll just have to be harder. My father always told me that the only limits we have are the ones we accept. I'm not ready to accept any limits yet. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're going to surprise a lot of people." The helicopter touched down at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado just as the California sun was setting over the Pacific. Sarah grabbed her gear and stepped onto the tarmac, immediately feeling the change in atmosphere. This wasn't just another naval base. This was where legends were made and dreams were shattered. The first person to greet her was Petty Officer First Class David Rodriguez, a compact man with kind eyes and the weathered look of someone who had seen real combat. He would be her liaison during the initial orientation period. Martinez, welcome to Coronado. I'm Rodriguez. I'll be showing you the ropes for the next few days before training officially starts. As they walked toward the barracks, Rodriguez explained what she could expect. The preparatory training is designed to get you ready for BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training. Most people think BUD/S is the hardest part, but honestly, if you can't handle the prep work, you'll never survive Hell Week. The barracks were spartanly furnished, but clean. Sarah's roommate was another woman, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Wells, who was there for advanced training in a different specialty. Rebecca was the first active-duty female officer Sarah had met who had already broken significant gender barriers in the Navy. "So you're the one everyone's talking about," Rebecca said as Sarah unpacked her gear. "The woman who thinks she can become a SEAL." "I don't think I can," Sarah replied carefully. "I know I'm going to try everything I have to make it happen." Rebecca smiled. "Good answer. Mind if I give you some advice?" "Please." "There are going to be 3 groups of people here. The first group will want you to succeed because they believe in equality and breaking barriers. The second group will want you to fail because they don't think women belong in special operations. But it's the third group you need to worry about." "What's the third group?" "The ones who don't care about your gender at all. They just want to know if you can do the job. Those are the people whose respect you really need to earn, because they're the ones who will judge you purely on your performance." The next morning began at 0500 with physical training. Sarah joined 23 other candidates, all men, for the initial fitness assessment. The instructor, Chief Petty Officer Williams, was a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could probably be heard in the next county. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his eyes settling on Sarah with particular intensity. "Welcome to what will either be the beginning of the most rewarding career of your life or the most humbling experience you'll ever endure. For the next 12 weeks, you will be pushed beyond what you think are your limits. Some of you will discover that your limits are actually much higher than you imagined. Others will discover that they're much lower." The physical assessment began with a timed run. Sarah had always been a strong runner, and she finished in the top 5. Next came push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. She held her own in the first 2 exercises, but struggled slightly with pull-ups, managing 12 when the standard was 15 for men. Chief Williams noted this on his clipboard without comment. The swimming portion was where Sarah truly excelled. Years of training had made her an exceptional swimmer, and she easily outpaced most of the male candidates in both speed and endurance. When they moved to treading water while carrying gear, her smaller size actually became an advantage. She could maintain her position longer with less energy expenditure. After the assessment, the candidates were gathered for their first classroom session on special operations history and philosophy. The instructor, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, was a veteran of multiple SEAL deployments who had a reputation for being tough, but fair. "The modern SEAL teams grew out of the underwater demolition teams of World War II," he began. "But the principles that guide us have remained the same. Excellence in all things, never leave a man behind, and the mission comes first." Notice I said a man. That's the traditional language, but the principle applies to everyone who earns the trident. After class, several of the male candidates approached Sarah. Some introduced themselves in a friendly manner, while others seemed to be sizing her up. One candidate, a former college football player named Marcus Thompson, was particularly direct. "No offense, Martinez, but I've got to ask, why are you doing this? I mean, there are so many other ways to serve where you wouldn't have to prove yourself every single day." "Because this is what I want to do," Sarah replied simply. "Same as you, I imagine." Another candidate, Jake Sullivan, nodded respectfully. "Fair enough. If you're serious about this, you're going to need to be stronger on those pull-ups. I'd be happy to work with you on technique if you want." Sarah accepted the offer gratefully. That evening, she and Jake spent an hour in the gym working on pull-up variations and grip strength exercises. Jake was a former Marine who had decided to transition to the Navy for special operations opportunities, and his training methods were effective. The key is not just pulling with your arms, he explained as he demonstrated. Engage your back muscles. Imagine you're trying to pull the bar down to you instead of pulling yourself up to the bar. As the weeks progressed, Sarah found herself forming friendships with several of her fellow candidates. Jake became a close training partner and friend. Marcus, despite his initial skepticism, gradually warmed up to her as he saw her work ethic and determination. Another candidate, Alex Chun, Jessica's cousin, as it turned out, became one of her strongest supporters. But not everyone was friendly. A small group of candidates, led by a former Army Ranger named Brad Morrison, seemed determined to make her experience as difficult as possible. They never did anything overtly hostile that would get them in trouble with the instructors, but they made their feelings clear through subtle comments and by excluding her from informal study groups and social activities. She's going to get someone killed someday, Sarah overheard Morrison say to his friends one evening. This whole social experiment is going to end badly. Rather than confront them directly, Sarah decided to let her performance speak for itself. She threw herself into training with even greater intensity, staying after hours to work on weaknesses and studying tactics and procedures until late into the night. The physical demands of the program increased steadily. Long runs became longer. Swimming distances increased. The weight of the gear they carried grew heavier. One by one, candidates began to drop out. Some failed to meet physical standards. Others decided the program wasn't for them. A few were eliminated for disciplinary reasons. Sarah not only kept up, but began to excel in areas where her smaller size and different approach were advantages. During a particularly challenging navigation exercise, she was the only candidate to successfully complete the course within the time limit, using a route that the others had dismissed as too difficult. "How did you figure out that route?" Jake asked afterward. "I looked at the terrain differently," she explained. "Everyone else was trying to take the most direct path, but I realized that going around the steep hills would actually be faster, even though it was longer distance-wise." Chief Williams had noticed her innovative thinking as well. After the navigation exercise, he called her aside. "Martinez, that was impressive work today. You're thinking like a special operator. But I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. How are you handling the social dynamics of this program?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "It's challenging, Chief. Some of the guys have been great. They judge me on my performance and help me improve. Others clearly don't want me here. But I expected that. I'm not here to make friends, though I'm glad I've made some good ones. I'm here to earn my place on a team." Fair enough. But remember, being a SEAL isn't just about individual performance. It's about being someone your teammates can trust completely. That trust has to go both ways. As they approached the midpoint of the preparatory program, a major test arrived, a simulated mission exercise that would last 3 days and 2 nights. The candidates were divided into teams of 6 and given a complex mission that required them to infiltrate a mock enemy facility, gather intelligence, and extract without being detected. Sarah found herself on a team with Jake, Marcus, Alex, and, unfortunately, Morrison and one of his friends, Tom Bradley. Morrison immediately assumed leadership of the team, which was his right as the most senior candidate. The mission began well. Sarah's skills in stealth and observation proved valuable during the reconnaissance phase. Jake's tactical expertise helped them plan their approach. Marcus's strength was crucial when they needed to move heavy equipment. But as they prepared for the actual infiltration, Morrison made a decision that put the entire team at risk. "We're going to take the direct approach through the main entrance," he announced. "Fast and aggressive." Alex shook his head. "That's not smart, Brad. Martinez found a way in through the drainage system that would be much safer." "I'm not following a plan made by someone who shouldn't even be here," Morrison snapped. "We do this my way." The team reluctantly followed Morrison's plan, and it was a disaster. They were detected almost immediately and had to abort the mission. During the debrief, the instructors made it clear they were disappointed in the team's performance. That night, as the team discussed what had gone wrong, Morrison blamed Sarah for distracting the team and undermining his leadership. But Jake, Marcus, and Alex weren't buying it. You ignored a good plan because of your personal issues, Marcus said bluntly. That's not leadership, that's ego. The confrontation escalated until Chief Williams arrived and ordered everyone to their bunks. But the damage was done. The team was fractured, and Sarah felt the weight of being responsible for the conflict, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. The next morning, Morrison approached her during breakfast. Look, Martinez, nothing personal, but you're a distraction. Maybe you should consider dropping out before you get someone hurt for real. Sarah looked him straight in the eye. The only person who got someone hurt yesterday was you, Morrison. Your pride was more important to you than the mission. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed in the real world. Morrison's face darkened, but before he could respond, Lieutenant Commander Jackson appeared at their table. Is there a problem here? No, sir, Morrison said quickly. Just discussing yesterday's exercise. Jackson looked between them with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what was going on. Good, because I'd hate to think that personal conflicts were interfering with training. That would be a reason to remove someone from the program. After Jackson left, Morrison leaned closer to Sarah. This isn't over, Martinez. You might fool some people, but I know what you really are, a liability waiting to happen. Sarah didn't respond, but she filed the conversation away in her memory. She was beginning to understand that her biggest challenges in this program might not be physical or mental. They might be political and personal. As the preparatory program entered its final phase, the pressure intensified dramatically. Longer runs, heavier gear, more complex exercises, and less sleep pushed everyone to their breaking points. Several more candidates dropped out, including Tom Bradley, Morrison's friend, who suffered a stress fracture in his leg. Sarah found herself becoming stronger and more confident with each passing day. Her pull-up numbers improved dramatically thanks to Jake's coaching and her own determination. Her swimming times got faster. Her marksmanship scores were consistently among the highest in the class. But, most importantly, she was earning the respect of her fellow candidates and instructors through her performance and attitude. When other candidates struggled, she helped them. When equipment needed to be maintained, she volunteered. When someone needed encouragement, she provided it. The final exercise of the preparatory program was a solo survival challenge. Each candidate was given minimal equipment and had to survive alone in the wilderness for 48 hours while evading enemy forces trying to capture them. It was a test of everything they had learned: physical endurance, mental toughness, tactical thinking, and the ability to function under extreme stress. Sarah was dropped off in a remote area of the mountains east of San Diego as the sun was setting. Her gear consisted of a knife, a small amount of emergency food, water purification tablets, a poncho, and basic first aid supplies. She had no radio, no GPS, and no contact with the outside world. The first challenge was finding water and shelter. Sarah located a small stream about half a mile from her drop-off point and found a cave that would provide protection from the elements. She rationed her emergency food carefully and supplemented it with edible plants she had learned to identify during survival training. On the second day, she heard helicopters in the distance. The enemy forces were actively searching for the candidates. Sarah used tactics she had learned to evade detection, moving only at night and during periods when helicopter activity was minimal. But the real test came when she encountered Morrison, who had apparently failed to properly evade the search teams and was being pursued by enemy forces. Despite their conflicts, Sarah couldn't abandon a fellow candidate in trouble. She helped him evade capture and shared her water with him when his ran out. "Why are you helping me?" Morrison asked as they waited in a hidden position for the search team to pass. "Because that's what teammates do," Sarah replied simply. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "I've been wrong about you, Martinez. I'm sorry." It was a simple apology, but it meant a lot to Sarah. When they were finally picked up at the end of the exercise, Morrison made a point of telling the instructors how Sarah had helped him. The preparatory program concluded with a ceremony attended by families and distinguished guests. Sarah's father had passed away, but Jessica Chun was there, having gotten leave to attend. As the candidates who had successfully completed the program received their certificates, Chief Williams addressed the group. "You have completed the first step in an incredibly demanding journey. Some of you will go on to complete BUD/S and earn the trident. Others will find different paths of service. But all of you have proven that you have the basic qualities necessary to attempt this training: courage, determination, and the willingness to put the mission and your teammates above yourself. As the ceremony ended, Lieutenant Commander Jackson approached Sarah. "Congratulations, Martinez. You've earned your place in BUD/S Class 247. Training begins in 2 weeks. Are you ready?" Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The Chow BUD/S Class 247 began with 52 candidates on a crisp Monday morning in October. Sarah stood in formation with the others as Instructor Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres addressed them for the first time. Torres was a legend in the SEAL community, a veteran of multiple combat deployments with a reputation for being absolutely merciless during training, but completely loyal to those who earned his respect. "Gentlemen and lady," Torres began, his eyes briefly meeting Sarah's. "Welcome to the most demanding military training program in the world. Over the next 6 months, you will be pushed beyond what you think is possible. Most of you will fail. This is not a criticism of your character or ability. It's simply a reality. Being a Navy SEAL requires a very specific combination of physical ability, mental toughness, and the capacity to function as part of an elite team under the most extreme conditions imaginable." The first phase of BUD/S focused on physical conditioning, and it was brutal from day one. The candidates began each morning with a 4-mile run in the sand, followed by calisthenics, obstacle courses, and swimming. The physical demands increased each week, and the instructors seemed to take particular pleasure in finding creative ways to exhaust their students. Sarah's smaller size, which some had seen as a disadvantage, actually proved beneficial in many exercises. She could move through obstacle courses faster than larger candidates, and her superior swimming ability often put her at the front of the group during water-based exercises. But she struggled with some of the pure strength-based challenges, particularly carrying heavy equipment over long distances. Jake Sullivan, who had become her closest friend and training partner, helped her develop strategies to compensate. "It's not about being the strongest," he explained as they practiced carrying a heavy log together. "It's about being smart with your body positioning and working as a team." Marcus Thompson, the former football player who had initially questioned her presence, had become one of her strongest supporters. His size and strength were complemented by her speed and agility, and they often partnered together during exercises that required different skill sets. Alex Chun brought a different perspective to their group. As someone from a family with multiple generations of military service, he understood the importance of tradition while also recognizing the value of progress. "My grandfather fought in Vietnam," he told Sarah one evening as they cleaned their gear. "He always said that the military gets stronger when it includes the best people, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." But not everyone in the class was supportive. Besides Morrison, who had somewhat softened his position after the survival exercise, there were several other candidates who made no secret of their belief that women didn't belong in the SEAL teams. Chief among them was Derek Walsh, a former college wrestler who seemed to view Sarah's presence as a personal insult. Walsh never openly confronted her, but he consistently worked to undermine her confidence and standing with the other candidates. He would make comments about special treatment when instructors offered technique corrections to help her improve. He questioned whether the standards were being lowered to accommodate her. Most damaging, he planted seeds of doubt about whether she could be trusted in a real combat situation. "I'm not saying she's not tough," Walsh would say to other candidates when he thought she couldn't hear. "But when bullets start flying and your life depends on your teammate being able to carry you to safety, are you really going to trust someone who weighs less than your gear?" These comments stung because they played on Sarah's own insecurities. She knew she was smaller and physically weaker than most of her teammates, and she worried constantly about whether she could fulfill all the obligations that being a SEAL would require. She compensated by working harder than anyone else, staying after official training hours to practice skills and build strength. Chief Torres noticed her dedication. After observing her spend an extra hour working on rope climbing techniques, he called her aside. "Martinez, I want to talk to you about something. You're working harder than anyone else in this class, and Your performance shows it. But I'm worried you're pushing yourself too hard. I have to work harder, Chief. I can't afford to be just as good as everyone else. I have to be better. Torres studied her for a moment. Why do you think that? Because people are watching. If I fail, it reflects on all women who might want to try this in the future. If I just barely make it through, people will say the standards were lowered. I have to succeed convincingly. That's a heavy burden to carry, Martinez. But let me tell you something about being a SEAL. It's not about being the strongest or the fastest or the toughest. It's about being reliable. It's about your teammates knowing that you'll do whatever it takes to complete the mission and bring everyone home safe. From what I've seen so far, you have that quality. As the first phase progressed, the attrition rate was steep. Candidates dropped out due to injury, academic failure, or simply deciding they couldn't handle the pressure. By the time they reached the infamous Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep, the class had been reduced to 38 candidates. Hell Week was designed to push candidates beyond their breaking point and then see who could continue functioning. The week began on Sunday evening and didn't end until Friday afternoon. During that time, candidates would get perhaps 4 hours of sleep total while enduring constant physical and mental challenges. Sarah approached Hell Week with careful preparation. She had studied accounts of previous classes and developed strategies for managing fatigue, staying warm in the cold Pacific water, and maintaining her mental focus under extreme stress. Most importantly, she had built strong relationships with her teammates who she knew would help her through the worst moments. The week began with a night dive in the frigid ocean. As the candidates swam through the dark water, many began to shiver uncontrollably. Sarah had prepared for this by practicing cold water exposure techniques, and she was able to maintain her core temperature better than most of her classmates. But it was during the infamous surf torture, lying in the ocean surf while freezing water crashed over their bodies, that Sarah faced her first major crisis of Hell Week. After 2 hours of exposure, she began experiencing symptoms of hypothermia. Her body was shaking so violently she could barely control her muscles, and her thinking was becoming cloudy. Jake, lying next to her in the surf, noticed her condition. "Sarah, you need to get out of here. Ring the bell." The bell was the symbol of surrender in BUD/S. Marcus, on her other side, began talking to her constantly, helping her stay focused and aware. "Come on, Martinez. We're going to get through this together. Tell me about your hometown. What was it like growing up there?" The conversation kept her mind active and helped her fight off the mental effects of the cold. After what felt like hours but was probably only another 30 minutes, the instructors finally called them out of the surf. As they stumbled toward the warm showers, several candidates decided they had had enough and went to ring the bell. But Sarah had survived her first major test of Hell Week. The rest of the week passed in a blur of exhaustion, physical challenges, and mental stress. There was the overnight boat race where teams had to carry heavy inflatable boats over their heads while running on the beach. There was the steel pier exercise where candidates had to perform calisthenics on the cold metal structure while waves crashed around them. There were long runs, impossible obstacle courses, and academic tests taken while barely able to stay awake. Through it all, Sarah and her core group of teammates, Jake, Marcus, and Alex, stuck together. They helped each other stay awake during academic sessions, shared food and water, and provided emotional support when the stress became overwhelming. On Thursday night, with less than 24 hours remaining, Sarah hit her lowest point. They were doing an exercise called Around the World, where teams had to carry boats around the perimeter of the base. Sarah was so exhausted she could barely put one foot in front of the other, and she was becoming a liability to her team. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to Jake during a brief rest. "I'm holding you guys back." "Bullshit," Marcus said firmly. "We started this together, and we're going to finish it together." "Look around, Sarah," Alex added. "Half the class is gone. You're still here because you belong here." They were right. Of the 38 candidates who had started Hell Week, only 21 remained. Sarah was not just surviving. She was thriving relative to her competition. The final challenge of Hell Week was a long run on the beach at dawn on Friday. As the sun rose over the Pacific, the surviving candidates ran together, no longer caring about individual performance, but simply celebrating their collective survival. When Chief Torres finally called an end to Hell Week, the remaining candidates collapsed on the beach, too exhausted to cheer, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that few people ever experience. Sarah looked around at her fellow survivors and realized that she had not only proven herself worthy of being there, she had become an integral part of the team. "Congratulations," Torres told the exhausted group. "You have completed Hell Week. But remember, this was just one milestone. You still have a long way to go." The second phase of BUD/S focused on diving and underwater operations. This was where Sarah truly excelled. Her background as a competitive swimmer and her smaller size made her a natural underwater. She could hold her breath longer than most candidates and move through the water with exceptional efficiency. The diving phase included challenging exercises like drown-proofing, where candidates had their hands and feet bound and had to survive in a swimming pool for 20 minutes. While some of the larger candidates struggled with buoyancy and panic, Sarah's comfort in the water allowed her to pass these tests easily. But it was during the underwater navigation exercises that she truly distinguished herself. Working in pairs with diving equipment in murky water, candidates had to navigate to specific underwater targets using only compass bearings and distance measurements. Sarah's spatial awareness and swimming ability made her one of the best in the class at these exercises. Her success in the diving phase helped silence some remaining critics. Even Walsh, who had continued his campaign of subtle undermining, was forced to acknowledge her superior performance underwater. "I still don't think she should be here," he confided to Morrison one evening. "But I have to admit she's one hell of a diver." Morrison, who had completed his own transformation from skeptic to supporter, shook his head. "Give it up, Derek. She's proven herself 10 times over. Maybe it's time to ask yourself why you're so determined to see her fail." The third and final phase of BUD/S focused on land warfare and tactics. This was where Sarah's intelligence and analytical abilities became most apparent. While she still struggled with some of the pure physical challenges, her understanding of tactics, her ability to think creatively under pressure, and her skill with weapons impressed both instructors and fellow candidates. During a complex mission exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy compound and extracting a hostage. When the original plan failed due to unexpected enemy reinforcements, Sarah quickly developed an alternative approach that used stealth and misdirection instead of force. "Instead of trying to fight our way in," she explained to her team leader, "what if we create a diversion on the north side of the compound, while a small team infiltrates from the south? I can get through that drainage system and open the main gate from inside." The plan worked perfectly, and the team completed their mission faster and with fewer casualties than any other team in the exercise. The instructors were so impressed they used Sarah's approach as a teaching example for future classes. As BUD/S neared its end, only 16 candidates remained from the original 52. Sarah had not only survived but had established herself as one of the top performers in the class. Her academic scores were the highest in the group, her diving performance was exceptional, and her tactical thinking was consistently innovative. But, more importantly, she had earned the respect and friendship of her fellow candidates. Even those who had initially opposed her presence now acknowledged her value to the team. The bonds forged during the hardest moments of training, particularly Hell Week, had created a brotherhood that transcended any differences of opinion about women in special operations. The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect California morning with families, distinguished guests, and active duty SEALs in attendance. Jessica Chun was there again, along with Sarah's commanding officer from her previous assignment. As the candidates marched in formation wearing their crisp dress uniforms, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment and belonging. Chief Torres spoke to the graduating class and their families. "The 16 men and women you see before you have completed one of the most demanding training programs in the world. They have proven that they have the physical ability, mental toughness, and character necessary to serve as Navy SEALs. But, more than that, they have become a team. They know that they can depend on each other absolutely, under any circumstances." When Sarah's name was called, and she stepped forward to receive her certificate and the coveted SEAL trident, the applause was thunderous. She looked out at the audience and saw respect, admiration, and, yes, pride in their faces. She had not only broken a barrier, she had shattered it completely. But, as she stood there with her new teammates, Sarah had no idea that the greatest tests of her life were still ahead. The brotherhood she had fought so hard to join, the men she had learned to trust with her life, would one day turn against her in the most devastating way possible. 3 years had passed since Sarah Martinez earned her trident, and she had spent that time proving herself repeatedly in training exercises and real-world missions. She was now Petty Officer First Class Martinez, a respected member of SEAL Team 7, and had completed deployments in Afghanistan and Syria that had earned her commendations for valor and tactical excellence. Her teammates from BUD/S Class 247 had spread throughout the SEAL community, but she maintained close relationships with many of them. Jake Sullivan was now on the East Coast with SEAL Team 4. Marcus Thompson had been promoted to Chief Petty Officer and was an instructor at the training center. Alex Chin served with SEAL Team 3 and had become one of the Navy's leading experts in urban warfare tactics. But it was her relationship with her current team that defined Sarah's daily life. SEAL Team 7 was commanded by Lieutenant Commander William Hayes, a veteran officer with multiple combat deployments who had initially been skeptical about having a woman on his team, but had been completely won over by Sarah's performance. Her platoon was led by Lieutenant David Park, a brilliant tactical mind who had graduated from the Naval Academy and immediately volunteered for SEAL training. Park had the rare ability to think strategically while maintaining focus on the smallest operational details, and he had become both a mentor and close friend to Sarah. The other members of her squad included Chief Petty Officer Robert "Bobby" Stevens, a 20-year veteran who served as the team's senior enlisted leader. Petty Officer First Class Michael "Mikey" Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Chun, no relation to Alex, their explosive ordnance expert, and Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Walsh, their sniper, and Derek Walsh's younger brother. Kevin Walsh had joined the team 6 months earlier, fresh out of SEAL training himself. Unlike his older brother Derek, who had eventually completed BUD/S, but had never fully accepted Sarah's place in the teams, Kevin had immediately embraced her as a teammate. He was young, eager to prove himself, and grateful for the mentorship that Sarah and the other senior team members provided. The team had been deployed to eastern Syria for a mission targeting a high-value ISIS leader named Abu Rashid, who was believed to be planning attacks against Western targets. Intelligence indicated that Rashid would be meeting with other terrorist leaders at a compound in a remote village near the Iraqi border. Sarah had been instrumental in planning the operation. Her analysis of the target area had identified weaknesses in the compound's defenses that larger, more conventional assault teams would have missed. She had also developed an infiltration route that would allow the team to approach undetected through a series of abandoned buildings. "The key is patience," Sarah explained to the team during their final briefing. "We insert 3 kilometers out and move slowly. There are civilian families in some of these buildings, so we need to be surgical. We get in, confirm the target, eliminate Rashid, gather any intelligence we can find, and get out clean." Lieutenant Park nodded approvingly. Sarah's plan gives us the best chance of mission success with minimal collateral damage. Questions? Chief Stevens, who had served with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan, looked at the satellite photos one more time. "What's our extraction plan if things go sideways?" "There are 3 rally points," Sarah continued, pointing to the map. "Primary extraction is here, secondary is here. If we're completely compromised, we fall back to the emergency extraction point 5 kilometers south. Bobby, you'll coordinate with air support if we need emergency evacuation." The mission launched at 2,100 hours on a moonless night. The team inserted via helicopter 3 kilometers from the target and began their approach on foot. Sarah took point, using her smaller size and exceptional stealth skills to scout the route ahead. Behind her, the team moved in perfect coordination, communicating through hand signals and maintaining tactical spacing. The infiltration went exactly as planned. Sarah's route through the abandoned buildings allowed them to reach the compound perimeter undetected. Using night vision equipment, they confirmed that Rashid was indeed at the location, meeting with 2 other high-value targets in a second-floor room. Jackpot, Rodriguez whispered into his radio. We have visual confirmation on all 3 targets. Lieutenant Park made the tactical decision to take all 3 terrorists if possible. It was an opportunity that might not come again, and the intelligence value would be enormous. But it would require splitting the team and executing a more complex assault plan. Sarah, Bobby, you take the main building. Tommy, Kevin, you secure the courtyard and watch for reinforcements. Mikey and I will take the secondary building where the guards are positioned. Execute in 60 seconds. The assault was swift and precise. Sarah and Chief Stevens entered the main building through a ground floor window and moved rapidly to the second floor. Using flashbang grenades to disorient the occupants, they breached the meeting room and found all 3 targets exactly where intelligence had indicated. Rashid reached for a weapon and was immediately engaged by Stevens. The other 2 terrorists attempted to flee and were taken down by Sarah. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, and all 3 high-value targets were eliminated with no civilian casualties. Targets down, Sarah reported calmly into her radio. Beginning sensitive site exploitation. The team spent 15 minutes gathering intelligence from the compound, computers, documents, communication devices, and anything else that might provide information about planned attacks or other terrorist operatives. Sarah's language skills proved valuable as she quickly scanned Arabic documents for anything of immediate tactical importance. We need to move, Lieutenant Park announced. Local security forces are likely responding to the noise. 30 seconds to exfiltration. The team moved out using their planned extraction route, but as they approached the primary pickup point, Rodriguez detected radio chatter indicating that Syrian government forces were moving in their direction. Change of plans, Park decided. We're going to the secondary extraction point. But as they moved toward the secondary location, they encountered an unexpected problem. A Syrian army patrol had set up a checkpoint directly on their extraction route, apparently as part of a routine security operation unrelated to their mission. Sarah quickly assessed the situation. I can get around them using the wadi to the east, but it'll take time. Or we can wait for them to move. But that increases our risk of discovery. Chief Stevens looked at the terrain through his night vision scope. That wadi is narrow and rocky. If they spot us in there, we'll be trapped. Not necessarily, Sarah replied. There's a side channel about halfway through that leads to high ground. If we're compromised, I can provide overwatch while the rest of you continue to the extraction point. It was a risky plan, but Lieutenant Park knew Sarah's tactical instincts were sound. Do it. Sarah, you take point again. Everyone else, stay tight and watch your spacing. The movement through the wadi went smoothly until they were almost through. A Syrian soldier, apparently taking a break from checkpoint duty to relieve himself, spotted movement in the drainage channel and called out an alarm. Immediately, the checkpoint erupted in activity as soldiers began moving toward the wadi with flashlights and weapons. Sarah made a split-second decision that saved her team, but put her in extreme danger. Go, 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 she whispered urgently into her radio. I'll hold them here. Get to the extraction point. Negative, Lieutenant Park responded. We don't leave anyone behind. David, listen to me. If they trap us all in here, the mission fails, and we all die. I can buy you time to get clear, then I'll follow the alternate route we discussed. Trust me. Sarah began engaging the Syrian soldiers from a concealed position, using precise rifle fire to keep them pinned down while her team continued through the wadi. Her smaller size allowed her to hide in places where the larger team members couldn't, and her marksmanship skills kept the enemy from advancing. For 10 minutes, she held off nearly a platoon of Syrian soldiers while her teammates reached safety. When her ammunition ran low, she used smoke grenades to cover her movement to a new position. Finally, when she was confident her team was clear, she began her own extraction using the alternate route she had memorized. But the alternate route was longer and more dangerous, taking her through terrain that was actively being searched by Syrian forces who had called in reinforcements. By the time she reached the emergency extraction point, the rest of her team had been picked up by the primary helicopter and was already en route back to base. Sarah spent 6 hours evading capture in hostile territory before finally reaching a position where she could signal for emergency extraction. When the rescue helicopter finally found her, she was exhausted, dehydrated, and had minor wounds from moving through rocky terrain in the darkness. But she was alive, and the mission had been a complete success. The intelligence gathered from the compound led to the disruption of 3 planned terrorist attacks and the identification of a major ISIS financial network. When Sarah finally made it back to base, her team was waiting for her. Chief Stevens grabbed her in a bear hug, tears in his eyes. "Don't you ever do something like that again," he said roughly. "We're a team. We stick together." Lieutenant Park was more formal but equally emotional. "That was some of the finest tactical thinking and individual heroism I've ever witnessed. You saved the mission and probably saved our lives." The mission was classified at the highest levels, but within the SEAL community, word of Sarah's actions spread quickly. She was recommended for the Silver Star, one of the military's highest decorations for valor in combat. But more importantly to Sarah, she had proven beyond any possible doubt that she belonged. Her teammates now looked at her not as the woman who had somehow made it into the SEALs, but as one of the most capable operators any of them had ever served with. It was this reputation and the absolute trust of her teammates that made what happened next so devastating. 6 months after the Syria mission, SEAL Team 7 was preparing for a deployment to Afghanistan. Intelligence indicated that a high-value Taliban leader was operating in a remote area of Helmand province, and Sarah's team was tasked with tracking him down. But 3 days before deployment, Sarah received a call that changed everything. Her sister Maria, a nurse in San Antonio, had been killed in a car accident. Sarah was granted emergency leave to attend the funeral and handle family affairs. "Take all the time you need," Lieutenant Park told her. "The deployment will wait, or we'll handle it with a replacement operator. Family comes first." Sarah flew back to Texas for what she expected to be a week of grief and difficult family business. Maria had been her only remaining family, and dealing with the funeral arrangements, estate matters, and emotional trauma was overwhelming. But while she was gone, something happened that would destroy her faith in the brotherhood she had fought so hard to join. During her absence, her teammates received intelligence about a significant Taliban meeting that required immediate action. Rather than wait for Sarah to return or request a replacement operator, Lieutenant Park made the decision to proceed with the mission using only 5 team members instead of the usual 6. The mission went wrong from the beginning. Without Sarah's analytical skills in mission planning and her expertise in stealth reconnaissance, the team walked into a trap. Taliban fighters had prepared an ambush at what was supposed to be the target location, and SEAL Team 7 found themselves pinned down under heavy fire. In the chaos of the firefight, Kevin Walsh was severely wounded by shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade. As the team fought to break contact and reach an evacuation point, Chief Stevens was also hit while trying to provide covering fire for the wounded Walsh. Tommy Chun managed to get both wounded men to the extraction point, but Stevens died during the helicopter flight back to base. Kevin Walsh survived, but lost his left leg below the knee. The after-action report was devastating. The mission had been compromised from the start due to poor intelligence and inadequate reconnaissance. The team had been undermanned and unprepared for the level of resistance they encountered. But rather than acknowledge the tactical failures that had led to the disaster, someone needed to be blamed. And in their grief and anger, Sarah's teammates made a decision that would haunt them forever. Lieutenant Park, struggling with his own guilt over the mission failure and the loss of Stevens, began to convince himself that things would have gone differently if Sarah had been there. His rational mind knew that her presence might not have changed anything, but his emotional need for someone to blame overrode his better judgment. "If Martinez had been with us, she would have spotted the ambush," he told the other survivors. "Her reconnaissance would have identified the trap before we walked into it." Tommy Chun, devastated by the loss of Stevens and Walsh's injury, found it easier to blame Sarah's absence than to accept that sometimes missions just go wrong. She should have been there. We needed her, and she wasn't there. Even Rodriguez, who had always been supportive of Sarah, was struggling with survivor's guilt and looking for explanations. "Maybe we relied on her too much. Maybe we should have been more self-sufficient." Kevin Walsh, in pain and facing the end of his SEAL career due to his injury, was angry at the world and needed someone to blame. When his teammates suggested that Sarah's absence had contributed to the mission failure, he embraced that explanation rather than face the randomness of what had happened to him. By the time the official investigation was completed, a narrative had formed within the team that Sarah Martinez had abandoned her teammates when they needed her most. It didn't matter that she had been on authorized leave dealing with a family tragedy. It didn't matter that the mission had been optional and could have been delayed. It didn't matter that her presence might not have changed anything. What mattered was that her teammates, the men she had bled with and saved and trusted with her life, had decided that she was responsible for the death of Bobby Stevens and the maiming of Kevin Walsh. And they were about to make her pay for it in the most devastating way possible. When Sarah returned from Texas a week later, she immediately knew something was wrong. Her teammates were cold and distant, avoiding eye contact and ending conversations when she approached. Lieutenant Park's briefings were formal and professional, but the warmth and camaraderie that had defined their relationships was gone. "What's going on?" she asked Jake Sullivan when he visited the base a few days later. Jake had heard rumors, but hadn't been told the specifics. "There was a mission while you were gone," he said carefully. "It went bad. Stevens is dead. Walsh is out of the teams. Everyone's pretty shaken up." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Bobby Stevens had been like a big brother to her, a mentor and protector who had always had her back. The idea that he was dead, that she hadn't been there when her team needed her, was almost unbearable. "Why didn't anyone tell me? I would have come back immediately." Jake looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, there's something else. Some people are saying, they're saying that if you had been there, things might have gone differently. That's ridiculous. I was on authorized leave for my sister's funeral. The mission could have been delayed, or they could have requested a replacement. I know that. You know that. But people are looking for someone to blame, and, unfortunately, you're not here to defend yourself." Over the next few weeks, Sarah tried repeatedly to reconnect with her teammates, to grieve Stevens' death together and support Walsh through his recovery. But they had closed ranks against her, creating a wall of silence and resentment that she couldn't penetrate. The breaking point came during a team meeting when Lieutenant Park announced that Sarah was being transferred to a different unit. "This team needs a fresh start," he said without looking at her. "Martinez, you'll be reporting to SEAL Team 5 next month." "Sir, I'd like to request that I stay with the team. We've been through a lot together, and I think the decision has been made, Petty Officer Martinez." That's all. As the meeting ended and her teammates filed out without a word, Sarah 2 years had passed since Sarah's forced transfer from SEAL Team 7, and she had spent every day of those 2 years planning her response. The betrayal had cut deeper than any physical wound she had ever endured, but it had also awakened something cold and calculating within her, the same strategic mind that had made her one of the most effective operators in the SEAL community. Sarah's new assignment with SEAL Team 5 had been professionally successful. Her commanding officer, Captain Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the Walsh brothers, was the first female officer to command a SEAL team, and she immediately recognized Sarah's value. Under Captain Walsh's leadership, Sarah had been promoted to Chief Petty Officer and had led several highly successful missions in Africa and the Middle East. But professional success wasn't enough to heal the wound left by her former teammates' betrayal. Every night, Sarah reviewed the events that had led to her exile from Team 7. She had obtained copies of all the official reports through her security clearance, and she had pieced together exactly what had happened during that fatal mission in Afghanistan. The truth was worse than she had imagined. The mission had failed not because of her absence, but because of fundamental tactical errors made by Lieutenant Park. He had ignored intelligence warnings about increased Taliban activity in the area. He had proceeded with an undermanned team when regulations clearly called for a full squad. Most damaging of all, he had failed to conduct proper reconnaissance before the assault, walking his men directly into a prepared ambush. Bobby Stevens had died, and Kevin Walsh had been maimed not because Sarah wasn't there, but because David Park had made a series of catastrophically bad decisions. And rather than accept responsibility, he and the others had scapegoated her, destroying her reputation and forcing her out of the team she had bled to join. Sarah's investigation had revealed something else. Her former teammates had actively worked to damage her career even after her transfer. They had spread rumors throughout the SEAL community about her abandoning her team, questioning her loyalty and reliability. Several promising assignment opportunities had been withdrawn after informal consultations with members of Team 7. But they had made a critical error. In their arrogance, they had assumed that Sarah would simply accept her exile and fade away quietly. They had forgotten that she was a warrior trained in patience, planning, and precision execution. They had forgotten that Navy SEALs never leave a mission unfinished. And Sarah Martinez had a mission now: justice. Her first move was to gather intelligence, using skills learned in years of special operations to investigate her former teammates' activities. What she discovered was a pattern of corruption and abuse that went far beyond their betrayal of her. Lieutenant Park, now promoted to lieutenant commander and commanding his own SEAL team, had been involved in a series of questionable operations in Iraq. Sarah's investigation revealed that he had been using his position to facilitate private military contracts for a company owned by his father-in-law, essentially selling access to classified military operations. Tommy Chun had developed a serious gambling addiction after leaving the teams and was deeply in debt to organized crime figures. He had been providing sensitive information about military operations to pay off his debts, potentially compromising active missions and endangering serving personnel. Michael Rodriguez had been arrested twice for domestic violence, but had avoided prosecution both times when his SEAL teammates provided false alibis and character references. His ex-wife had been hospitalized on 3 separate occasions due to his abuse. Kevin Walsh, despite his medical discharge from the SEALs, had been collecting disability payments while working as a private military contractor in violation of federal regulations. He had also been involved in arms trafficking, selling military-grade weapons on the black market. Each piece of information was carefully documented and verified. Sarah used her language skills to translate intercepted communications, her technical training to gather electronic evidence, and her network of contacts throughout the military and intelligence communities to confirm every detail. But Sarah wasn't interested in simply exposing their crimes to authorities. That would be too quick, too clean. These men had destroyed her faith in the brotherhood she had devoted her life to serving. They deserved to experience the same sense of betrayal, the same loss of everything they held dear. So Sarah began a different kind of operation, one designed to systematically destroy each of her former teammates using their own weaknesses against them. Her first target was Tommy Chun. Sarah knew that his gambling addiction was funded by selling military intelligence, but she also knew that his criminal contacts were paranoid and violent. Using her skills in electronic surveillance and her knowledge of Chun's habits, she began feeding false information to his organized crime connections. Sarah created fake intelligence reports suggesting that Chun was cooperating with federal investigators, providing information about the crime family's operations in exchange for protection. She made sure these reports reached the right people through carefully orchestrated leaks. The result was swift and devastating. Chun's criminal contacts immediately cut off his access to their operations and began pressuring him to repay his debts in full. When he couldn't produce the money, they escalated to physical threats against his family. Desperate and terrified, Chun made the mistake of trying to sell actual classified information to pay his debts. But Sarah had anticipated this move and had alerted federal investigators through anonymous tips. Chun was arrested by FBI agents as he attempted to deliver classified documents to an undercover federal agent. The arrest made national news as a case of military personnel selling secrets to organized crime. Chun's military career was over, his security clearance revoked, and he faced decades in federal prison. But, more importantly for Sarah's purposes, he was now completely discredited within the SEAL community. Her next target was Michael Rodriguez. Sarah's investigation had revealed the full extent of his domestic violence, including medical records, police reports that had been suppressed, and testimony from his ex-wife that had never been heard in court. Sarah began a careful campaign to ensure that this information reached the right people. She provided evidence to military prosecutors, civilian authorities, and domestic violence advocacy groups. But she didn't stop there. She also made sure the information reached Rodriguez's current girlfriend, his commanding officer, and several prominent journalists who covered military affairs. The revelation of Rodriguez's history of abuse triggered a formal investigation by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. His ex-wife, finally, believing she would be taken seriously, provided detailed testimony about years of violence and intimidation. Rodriguez was court-martialed and convicted of multiple charges related to domestic violence and conduct unbecoming an officer. He was sentenced to 5 years in military prison, dishonorably discharged, and stripped of all military benefits. His reputation within the military was completely destroyed. Kevin Walsh presented a different challenge. His arms trafficking operation was sophisticated and well-concealed, but Sarah's investigation had identified his supply sources and customer network. Rather than simply reporting him to authorities, she decided to use his criminal enterprise to destroy him more completely. Sarah infiltrated Walsh's operation by posing as a representative of a foreign military contractor interested in purchasing weapons. Using her language skills and knowledge of international arms markets, she convinced Walsh that she represented a lucrative new customer. Over several months, Sarah led Walsh deeper into what he believed was a major arms deal, encouraging him to expand his operations and make larger purchases from his suppliers. She provided him with what appeared to be substantial down payments, funded by her own savings and money she had earned through legitimate consulting work. But the entire operation was a trap. Sarah had been working with federal investigators from the beginning, providing them with detailed documentation of Walsh's criminal network. When Walsh attempted to complete what he thought would be his largest arms sale ever, he was arrested by a joint task force of federal agents. The evidence against Walsh was overwhelming. Financial records, recorded conversations, physical evidence of weapons trafficking, and testimony from cooperating witnesses that Sarah had helped develop. He was convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But Sarah saved her most elaborate revenge for David Park. Park's corruption in Iraq was more sophisticated than the others, involving shell companies, foreign bank accounts, and a network of accomplices. Simply exposing his crimes wouldn't be enough. Sarah wanted to ensure that his fall would be as spectacular and complete as possible. Sarah spent months building a detailed case against Park's entire operation. She traced money flows through multiple countries, identified all the participants in his corruption scheme, and gathered evidence of specific instances where his actions had endangered military personnel. But rather than turn this information over to authorities immediately, Sarah decided to let Park destroy himself. She began feeding him information that led him to believe he was about to be investigated, causing him to panic and make increasingly desperate attempts to cover his tracks. Park's efforts to hide his corruption only created more evidence against him. He moved money between accounts, destroyed records, and pressured potential witnesses, all actions that Sarah carefully documented and that would later be used as evidence of obstruction of justice. When Park finally realized he was trapped, he made a final desperate attempt to save himself by trying to shift blame to others, including Sarah. He claimed that his corrupt activities had been authorized operations designed to gather intelligence on enemy financial networks, and that Sarah's abandonment of the team had forced him to seek alternative funding sources. It was exactly the response Sarah had anticipated and planned for. She had spent months gathering evidence that would completely refute Park's claims and demonstrate the purely personal nature of his corruption. When federal investigators finally moved against Park, they had everything they needed for an airtight case. The evidence package Sarah provided was so comprehensive that Park's defense attorneys advised him to plead guilty rather than go to trial. Park was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for corruption, fraud, and obstruction of justice. But perhaps more damaging to him personally was the revelation that his corruption had directly contributed to the mission failure that had killed Bobby Stevens and wounded Kevin Walsh. The investigation revealed that Park had compromised intelligence networks through his corrupt activities, leading to degraded information about Taliban movements in the area where Team 7 had been ambushed. His greed and corruption had literally contributed to the death of his own teammate. With all 4 of her primary targets destroyed, Sarah turned her attention to the broader implications of their betrayal. She had documented evidence that the culture within certain SEAL teams allowed for the kind of abuse and corruption she had uncovered. This wasn't just about her personal revenge. It was about protecting future service members from similar betrayals. Sarah compiled a comprehensive report documenting everything she had learned about her former teammates' crimes and the institutional failures that had allowed them to occur. She provided copies to the Inspector General of the Navy, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and several journalists known for their investigative work on military issues. The resulting investigation led to significant reforms in how the SEAL community handled allegations of misconduct, domestic violence, and corruption. New oversight procedures were implemented, and several high-ranking officers who had protected corrupt subordinates were forced to retire. But Sarah's most important move was reaching out to Bobby Stevens' widow and Kevin Walsh's family. She provided them with the complete truth about what had happened during that fatal mission in Afghanistan, including evidence that Park's corruption and tactical failures, not her absence, had been responsible for the casualties. The revelation was devastating for the families, but it also provided them with closure and the opportunity to seek justice. Stevens' widow filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Park and the private military company that had been involved in his corruption. Walsh's family, learning that his injuries were the result of leadership failures rather than bad luck, was finally able to process their grief properly. Kevin Walsh himself, serving his prison sentence, eventually learned the truth about the mission that had cost him his leg. In a letter to Sarah, he expressed his remorse for participating in the campaign against her and acknowledged that she had been scapegoated for failures that weren't her responsibility. 2 years after beginning her campaign for justice, Sarah stood in her office at SEAL Team 5 headquarters, looking out at the Pacific Ocean where her journey had begun so many years earlier. All of her former teammates were in prison, their reputations destroyed, and their crimes exposed. The truth about Bobby Stevens' death had been revealed, and reforms had been implemented to prevent similar betrayals in the future. But Sarah felt no satisfaction in her victory. The brotherhood she had believed in so deeply had proven to be an illusion, and destroying those who had betrayed her couldn't restore her faith in what the SEALs were supposed to represent. Captain Walsh knocked on her door and entered with a manila folder. "Chief Martinez, I have new orders for you." Sarah looked at the folder without opening it. "Another transfer, ma'am?" "Actually, no. These are orders promoting you to Senior Chief Petty Officer and assigning you to the SEAL Training Center. You're going to be responsible for developing new programs to ensure integrity and accountability in the teams." Sarah opened the folder and reviewed the orders. It was an important assignment, one Alizé that everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed to build, had been taken away from her. The brotherhood she had believed in, the men she had trusted with her life, had betrayed her when she was at her most vulnerable. But they had made a critical mistake. They had forgotten that Sarah Martinez was a Navy SEAL, trained in skills far beyond just military tactics. They had forgotten that she was capable of thinking strategically, planning complex operations, and executing them with precision. Most importantly, they had forgotten that Navy SEALs never forget, and they never forgive a backstab. Sarah Martinez was about to become the most dangerous person any of them had ever encountered, a highly trained special operations warrior with nothing left to lose and a burning need for justice. The real war was about to begin, and when that day came, they would learn that the woman they had betrayed was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Because Navy SEALs never forget, and Sarah Martinez was about to become the most dangerous SEAL of all, one with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. For now, though, she was simply a new member of an elite community, ready to serve her country and her teammates with everything she had. The real mission was just beginning. Things she had overcome, and the greater challenges that lay ahead. Blood/S would be even more demanding than the preparatory program. Hell Week alone would push her beyond anything she had ever experienced. But she also thought about the respect she had earned from her fellow candidates and instructors, the friendships she had formed, and the confidence she had built in herself. She was ready for whatever came next. "Yes, sir," she replied with absolute certainty. "I'm ready." As she walked toward the future that awaited her, Sarah had no way of knowing that the men standing beside her, the ones she was beginning to think of as brothers, would one day become the source of her greatest betrayal. But she also didn't know that the strength, skills, and determination she was building now would eventually become the tools of her ultimate revenge. For now, she was simply a young woman who had achieved something remarkable and was preparing to reach even higher. The real test was just beginning. I hope so. I really hope so. As Sarah packed her gear that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small town in Texas to the deck of a Navy ship, preparing for the most challenging military training in the world. She thought about her father, who had passed away during her first year of service, and how proud he would have been to see her chasing her dreams. She also thought about all the women who might come after her, the ones who were watching to see if it was possible. The weight of their hopes and expectations was heavy, but it was also motivating. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore. The next morning, as the helicopter lifted off from the ship's deck, carrying her toward her new destiny, Sarah looked down at the vast Pacific Ocean below. Somewhere out there, in the training facilities of Coronado, the most demanding military training program in the world was waiting for her. She had no way of knowing that some of the men she would soon call brothers in arms would one day betray her in the worst possible way. She couldn't foresee the years of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood that lay ahead, or the devastating moment when it would all come crashing down. But she also couldn't imagine the strength she would find within herself when that betrayal came, or the lengths she would go to ensure that justice was served. Because Navy SEALs never forget, and they never forgive a backstab. For now, though, all of that was in the future. Today, Sarah Martinez was just a young woman with a dream, flying toward the most challenging chapter of her life, ready to prove that courage comes in all shapes and sizes.